Imagine the silence of the desert, broken not by wind, but by something far worse. A presence hovering above the jagged peaks of Guadalupe Ridge. No sound. No signal. Just a light. A light that was not light. It pulsed like breath, without blinking, without form. What was that? Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this story. Now, let's continue with the story. The year was 2004. News cycles were obsessed with something that had unfolded over the Pacific Ocean, a bizarre encounter between a U.S. Navy carrier group and what would come to be known as the Tic Tac object. The world was watching the ocean. But above the deserts of Texas, in the remote shadows of Guadalupe Mountains, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something no one noticed except the few who lived close enough to see it. It began with a light. That night, several locals living on the outskirts of the ridge reported seeing it. Hovering. Silent. No blinking patterns. No rotor sounds. No trail. Just a single white illumination, drifting unnaturally across the sky as if tethered to an invisible thread. Linda Bowers, a retired schoolteacher in Del City, stood frozen on her porch, coffee in hand, long gone cold. "It didn't move like anything I've ever seen," she would later whisper. "It just stared." For 5 minutes, the light remained still, suspended like a judgment. Then, in a blink, it was gone. Not vanished in distance, but simply ceased. As if someone had flipped reality off like a switch. Daniel Ruiz, a hobbyist astronomer from Carlsbad, was one of the few who managed to point a telescope at the anomaly. What he saw refused every logical category. Through his lens, the object emitted no reflective spectrum. It absorbed the light around it like a void stitched into the atmosphere. His notes, scribbled and shaky, repeated the same phrase 3 times. No heat. No scatter. No light. Nothing. Daniel tried to report it. First to the local observatory. Then to an online forum. The responses were the same: speculation, disbelief, silence. But within hours his post disappeared. His account was locked. 3 days later, a technician working at a radar station near El Paso reported a brief appearance of an unidentified blip, something fast, erratic. It appeared out of nowhere, then reappeared 30 miles away in less than 1 second. There were no heat readings. No transponder signals. No known aircraft could match that movement. When asked about it, the technician hesitated. "They told me to forget it. Just weather noise. Static. But I've seen static before. This wasn't it." 1 week passed. Most of the world had already forgotten the Pacific incident. But the light over Guadalupe Ridge had left something behind. Something no one could see, at least not with eyes. A group of geologists from the University of Texas was conducting magnetic surveys across the region when they encountered a sudden spike in their readings. Instruments failed. Compass needles drifted. When they mapped the data later that night, they found it. A narrow corridor, 100 meters wide, cut like a scar through the magnetic field. There were no structures. No power lines. No geological fault. Just desert rock. And the strange thing? Animals refused to cross it. Not a single track, not even lizards or insects. Like the earth itself remembered what had passed through it. Meanwhile, rumors swelled. A scientist embedded in a private defense firm leaked an internal comparison. The flight path recorded in El Paso bore shocking similarities to the Tic Tac incident. Identical movement patterns. Identical speed. Identical silences. Only the locations were different. Ocean. Mountain. Nowhere was safe. And nothing explained. Guadalupe Ridge remained still, the wind whispering low through stone and time. But the people who saw it, the ones who watched the light and were watched in return, they could not sleep. And they did not forget. The desert doesn't speak, but it remembers. And in the weeks following the light's appearance above Guadalupe Ridge, that memory festered in the minds of those who witnessed it. Daniel Ruiz had stopped responding to emails. Once known in amateur astronomy circles as reliable, enthusiastic, and always willing to share his findings, he vanished from his online forums completely. His telescope blog, usually updated weekly, had gone dark. It was Linda Bowers who first voiced concern. She had met Daniel once years prior, during a local star-watching event near the state park. He was quiet but passionate, precise in his speech. The kind of man who could spot a satellite flare with his naked eye. Now, not even his phone answered. Worried, Linda contacted a mutual acquaintance who lived closer to Carlsbad. 3 days later, she received a call. Daniel had been found in his home. Alive, but shaken. The man who once measured stellar brightness in decimal points now sat silent in his living room, eyes hollow, lights off. The telescope, his pride and joy, had been disassembled, every lens shattered. Not removed. Shattered. As if by force. There was no sign of forced entry. No robbery. Nothing taken. Just one strange detail. On the wall behind his desk, scrawled in thick charcoal, were 3 lines. I saw it again. It wasn't alone. They know I saw them. Word spread. Quietly, among the few who had shared their observations in private groups or encrypted message boards. The event over Guadalupe Ridge wasn't isolated. A man in northern Arizona described an object matching the exact description, hovering, then vanishing. A woman in New Mexico claimed her car battery died the moment it appeared. She never saw the object, only the light, but it left her with tinnitus that wouldn't fade. And yet, none of it made the news. Every attempt to document the event publicly was scrubbed. Videos deleted. Posts flagged for misinformation. Algorithms buried first-hand accounts. Only those who already knew what to look for could still find the traces. Meanwhile, something strange began to happen around the ridge. Local rangers, while patrolling trails near McKittrick Canyon, discovered disturbed soil patterns that defied explanation. Not tire tracks. Not footprints. But a repeated indentation, round and shallow, spaced precisely 5 meters apart, forming a path that ended at a cliffside. No signs of entry or exit. Just impact points. A biologist conducting nocturnal wildlife studies left her audio recorders overnight in that area. When she retrieved the devices the next morning, all were intact, batteries full. But during the exact hour between 2 and 3 a.m., every file contained the same thing: absolute silence. Not wind. Not insects. Not even static. Just an unnatural void, as if sound itself had been swallowed. She didn't report the findings to her department. She deleted the data. And she never returned to that part of the park again. A month after the light first appeared, Linda Bowers stood once more on her porch. She hadn't spoken publicly. She didn't want to be called paranoid. But deep down she had changed. Every evening she found herself looking up. Not in wonder, but in dread. And then, on a moonless Thursday night, she saw it again. Only this time it wasn't one light. There were 3. Perfectly aligned in a triangle. Motionless. Silent. Glowing not above her, but far to the east, over a barren stretch of desert known for little more than rattlesnakes and dust. They hovered for exactly 2 minutes. Then, one by one, blinked out. Not faded. Not flew away. Just gone. Linda didn't speak. She didn't breathe. She simply closed the door, locked it, and sat in the dark. Somewhere out there, things were moving. And she knew, deep in her bones, that whatever they weren't here to be seen. Guadalupe Ridge stretched its bones across the desert, indifferent to time. For centuries, it had stood as a spine of stone, unmoving, untouched. But now, something stirred beneath its skin. 3 weeks after the second sighting, a team of geologists returned to the area with a renewed sense of urgency. They had been reviewing magnetic data anomalies from their last survey, lines of irregularity that formed not a pattern of chaos, but one of design. One of intent. What they saw on the new scans should not have been there. A narrow, magnetically active corridor, almost perfectly straight, running for nearly 2 kilometers beneath the ridge. No seismic activity. No volcanic signature. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. The corridor didn't exist in the topography, but the Earth's magnetic field bent around it, like water around an invisible stone. One of the team, a graduate student named Ethan Moss, decided to descend into a small limestone crevice near the magnetic boundary. He was cautious, careful. But something compelled him, something irrational, a pull just beneath the surface of logic. He descended 12 meters. At the base, he found nothing unusual at first. Just old rock, fossils, sediment. But then, as he moved his hand along the wall, he felt it. Heat. A single, sharp warmth, not spreading, but concentrated, as if radiating from something embedded in the rock. He dug with his knife. Just a little. And what he uncovered wasn't stone. It was smooth. Cold. Metallic. And it pulsed once under his palm. A silent thump like a heartbeat. Ethan screamed. By the time the others reached him, he was unconscious. Not injured. Not physically harmed. Just gone vacant behind the eyes. When he woke 2 hours later, he could no longer recall the cave. His memory of the day had been scrubbed clean like chalk from a slate. He would never return to the site. The team didn't file an official report. They claimed they lost a drone, that equipment failure had corrupted their data. But one of the researchers, a woman named Dr. Eliza Renner, quietly sent copies of the raw magnetic scans to an old contact, someone once involved in classified aerial research near Groom Lake. The message was simple. We found something. It's not geological. She never received a reply. Meanwhile, sightings continued to spread. A group of campers near Dog Canyon saw lights that hovered motionless above the canyon floor, impossibly low, without a single sound. One camper, a former Navy air traffic controller, reported that the lights shifted direction without rotation, violating every known law of flight. A family traveling west along Route 62 claimed their vehicle's electronics failed completely for 5 minutes while passing near the ridge. GPS froze. Radio static hissed. Even the dashboard clock reversed by 3 minutes. When they arrived at the next gas station, all devices worked again, but none of them could shake the nausea that lingered for hours. Local authorities dismissed it all as power surges. Optical illusions. The effect of desert heat on tired eyes. But those who knew better began to see the pattern. The sightings were tightening. Moving inward. Closing in on the ridge like wolves around a fire. In Del City, Linda Bowers began having dreams. Not of lights. But of sounds, tones she couldn't place, melodies that made her wake with tears on her cheeks and a name in her mouth she didn't recognize. Something was calling her. Or warning her. She couldn't tell which. One morning, she stepped outside to find her front lawn littered with birds. Dozens of them. Perfectly intact. Eyes open. Dead. No sign of trauma. No predator. Just silence. As if the sky itself had dropped them in unison. She didn't call anyone. She didn't need to. Because that night, as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, she looked out over the horizon and saw something rising slowly just above the farthest cliff. A dark shape. Wider than her house. No lights this time. Just a presence. And for the first time she understood. The lights were never trying to be seen. They were hurting. Salt Flat was little more than a marker on a map, a scattered collection of homes, trailers, and an old gas station clinging to the edge of the Chihuahuan Desert. It was the kind of place people passed through without slowing down. A dot between nowhere and silence. But on the night of November 4th, something happened in Salt Flat that no one could explain. And those who tried? They disappeared. It started with a 911 call. The operator on duty at the Hudspeth County Dispatch Center received a transmission at 2:14 a.m. The caller was male. His voice trembled. There was wind behind him and something else, an electric hum that bled through the line like interference. They're above the station. I can't get out. They're not moving. They're just there. My lights are dead. My. Static. Then silence. The call disconnected. When authorities traced the origin, it led to the old gas station at Salt Flat, now abandoned for years. No staff. No power. No records of recent activity. By sunrise, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the location. What he found was more unsettling than if the station had been destroyed. Everything was in place. Fuel pumps intact. Windows unbroken. But the air was wrong. Charged. Still. Heavy with the scent of ozone. And in the center of the parking lot, there was a blackened circle, perfectly round, 4 meters across, etched into the asphalt. As if something massive and hot had hovered there mere inches from the surface. There were no tire marks. No footprints. No trace of the caller. Inside the convenience store, the deputy found a flashlight lying on the floor, still warm. And beneath the counter, tucked into a pocket of shadow, sat a cell phone, screen shattered, but still flickering faintly. The last photo taken was distorted beyond recognition. Blurred. Glitched. But behind the smear of corrupted pixels was a shape. Triangular. Flat. Hovering above the gas station's roof. And just beneath it, a sliver of a figure. Small. Human. Arms raised. As if shielding its eyes. That image was never officially logged. The phone was turned over to a federal contact later that evening, and no further mention of the incident appeared in any report. Word of the disappearance spread anyway. Locals whispered about the lights returning to Salt Flat every few nights, just before dawn. A soft glow above the old station. No movement. No sound. Then gone before the first rays of light touched the desert floor. Linda Bowers heard about it through a church friend. She didn't question it. She didn't ask for proof. She just closed her curtains tighter that night and didn't sleep at all. Across the ridge, at a small observatory operated by the University of Texas, astronomers began reporting missing data windows. Entire nights of sky tracking were recorded as clean, no stars. No satellite paths. No cloud cover. Just blank data. Like the sky had turned off for hours at a time. One technician swore she saw something in the raw feed. A ripple. A distortion. A dark mass blocking out the constellations, not with light, but with absence. She was later reassigned to a lower-level project. Another technician, under anonymity, admitted to having installed a private sky camera outside the facility. What he captured was deeply unsettling. Between 1:47 and 1:49 a.m., 2 nights before the Salt Flat incident, the stars above Guadalupe Ridge vanished completely. Not faded. Not blurred. They simply ceased. And then, a frame later, they returned, shifted by several degrees. As if the sky itself had been moved. 3 people went missing that month. A hiker from Roswell. A trucker making a fuel stop. And a teenage boy who had gone camping with his father on the east side of the ridge. The father was found, curled in the bed of his pickup, clutching a rifle. He was unharmed but unresponsive. He never spoke again. The boy was never found. No signs of struggle. No tracks. No remains. Only one note scratched into the side of the truck bed with a pocket knife. The letters rough. Uneven. Rushed. It was already here. In the following weeks, traffic through the area slowed. Locals left. Hikers canceled trips. Campgrounds emptied. But the ridge remained vast, unmoved, patient. And somewhere beneath it, something pulsed. Something waited. By December, Guadalupe Ridge had become a shadow on the map, a place avoided, unspoken, forgotten deliberately. But there were still those who lingered on its fringes. People who couldn't look away. People like Dr. Eliza Renner. Eliza wasn't a believer. She was a scientist, trained in electromagnetic geology, with years of work cataloging fault lines and subsurface anomalies. But what she had seen in the data from the ridge refused to fit any natural model. She knew it. And more importantly, something inside her refused to let it go. So she returned. Not with a team this time, but alone. Just her, a rented van filled with instruments, and one question burning in her mind. What had Ethan touched? She set up camp on the southern edge of the ridge, near a dry arroyo known to be geologically stable. Using a portable EMF rig and a high-frequency spectral scanner, she began monitoring the area for residual magnetic interference. For the first 48 hours, nothing. Then, on the third night, at 2:06 a.m., her scanner came alive. The frequency was unlike anything she'd encountered. A band that didn't register on standard spectrums. It pulsed low and slow, somewhere between sound and silence. Not mechanical. Not biological. Something else. She recorded it. When she played it back through a spectrogram filter, her breath caught. The pulses weren't random. They formed a pattern. A structure. It wasn't noise. It was a signal. Eliza didn't sleep that night. The signal repeated every hour on the minute for 4 cycles. Then silence. The next night it returned. This time stronger. Her equipment began to heat as the signal reached its peak, then shut down entirely, fried. That morning, Eliza left the site, but not before burying the original data drive beneath a marker stone. She'd learned by then what happened to others who tried to expose these findings. Back in El Paso, she contacted a former colleague from Los Alamos. He reviewed a snippet of the recording. The response was immediate, curt, and chilling. "This is not geological. Don't send anything else. Burn what you have. Forget it." 2 days later, Eliza's laptop was remotely wiped. Her home Wi-Fi was flooded with foreign IP requests. Her university login was revoked without explanation. She stopped talking about the ridge. But the signal did not stop. Others began to hear it, those who didn't know they were listening. Shortwave radio enthusiasts across Texas started reporting sudden bursts of static, always at the same time each night. Ham radio operators captured fragments. Not language. Not code. But structured interference. One user described it as a machine breathing behind the clouds. Meanwhile, a man known only as a Kilo Mike, who ran a pirate number station out of a cabin near Guadalupe Pass, began broadcasting warnings. "Stop pointing antennas at the ridge," he said during one recorded transmission. "It's not a transmission. It's a response. And it's not talking to us." A week later, his station went dark. All that remained was a single looping transmission. 5 tones. 2 seconds of silence. And the sound of footsteps crunching over gravel. Back in Del City, Linda Bowers started hearing the hum. It was low. Subtle. Like an engine buried far underground. Her lights flickered every night at the same time. Her clocks began to drift by seconds, always correcting themselves by morning. She stopped going outside after sunset. One evening, her dog refused to enter the house. It stood facing the ridge, hackles raised, tail low, teeth bared. It howled once, then ran into the desert and never returned. Linda knew, without evidence, without science, without words. Something was under the ridge. Not sleeping. Not hiding. Waiting. And it was reaching out. 200 miles away, at a defense research facility, a team working with experimental quantum sensors picked up a faint echo in their dark field array. It repeated every 60 minutes. The lead scientist checked the coordinates. He froze. The signal's origin point wasn't on the ocean floor or in the upper atmosphere. It was coming from the exact center of Guadalupe Ridge. He logged the finding. Then closed the file. It was never opened again. It was just after New Year's when the man arrived. No one saw him enter Del City. No car. No dust trail. No registration at the local motel. He appeared one morning at the diner on the edge of town, sat at the corner booth, and ordered black coffee. He wore a charcoal gray jacket with no logo, no patches. His boots were military but too clean. His eyes never wandered. He introduced himself only as Marsh. Linda Bowers noticed him on her second visit that week. He wasn't from around here, everyone knew everyone in Del City. But there was something else. Something colder than unfamiliarity. The way he sat. The way he scanned the windows without moving his head. Watching. She didn't approach him. He approached her. After she paid her bill and stepped into the sun, he followed. Not fast. Not threatening. Just there. Ma'am, he said, his voice low, practiced, almost gentle. You saw them, didn't you? Linda stopped walking. What do you mean? The lights. The ridge. The patterns. I know what you've been hearing. And I know they haven't stopped. She said nothing. Then Marsh leaned in, his voice just above a whisper. They're not here for you. They never were. But now you've seen too much. Which means they know your name. And with that he walked away. Not toward a car. Not toward the motel. He just turned the corner and disappeared between buildings. She never saw him again. Later that week, Linda received a letter. No stamp. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper. On it, a map of Guadalupe Ridge. Marked with a single X. No other details. She stared at it for hours. And in the end, against every instinct she had, she packed a bag. Flashlight. Water. A notebook. A handheld EMF reader Ethan had once given her. She left at sunset. The desert was cold. Silent. The path marked on the map led her along a dry ravine, past an ancient cottonwood tree, and through a narrow canyon rarely traveled. She walked for nearly 2 hours. At the marked spot, nothing stood out. Just rock. Dust. Sky. But her EMF reader spiked. Not slowly. Not erratically. Immediately, jumping to full power the moment she crossed an invisible threshold. Her flashlight dimmed. Her breath grew short. Then she heard it. A vibration. Low. Deep. Not through the air, but through the stone. She stepped forward. And there, half buried in the sand, she found the edge of something. Metallic. Burnished black. It curved into the ground, as if a massive structure was hidden beneath the desert. No seams. No writing. No screws. She reached out. Touched it. And for one brief second, less than a blink, her mind left the desert. She saw stars. But wrong ones. Patterns not mapped in any sky. A spiral of light orbiting a void so massive it bent vision itself. She felt watched. Not by one presence, but by many. Not eyes. Not minds. Something more ancient. More alien. Then she was back. The sky was darker. Her watch read 3 hours later. But she remembered every second. She didn't go home. Not immediately. She slept in her truck, miles from the site. And in the hours before dawn, she dreamed of the man from the diner. Standing at the base of a colossal structure, half submerged in the earth, whispering to something that had no face, but many mouths. The next morning she returned to the site. But the metal was gone. Buried. Hidden. Or worse, moved. The EMF reader was dead. The sand where the object had been was cold, but not natural. Too smooth. Almost fused. Like glass. And carved into the stone nearby, shallow and small, were 5 letters. Marsh. She drove home in silence. She never told anyone what she saw. But she began writing. Journals. Maps. Diagrams. Not to share. To prepare. Because now she understood. The lights were only the beginning. And the man from nowhere wasn't a warning. He was a herald. Winter passed over the desert like a fading breath. Snow never came to Guadalupe Ridge, only wind, sharp and endless, whispering through the canyons like a language no one remembered how to speak. But in the ground, the whispering grew louder. Seismic activity near the ridge, once steady and predictable, began to spike in inexplicable bursts. Not tremors, vibrations. Too brief to register as earthquakes, too patterned to be coincidence. They came at intervals. Perfect intervals. Anomalies were first detected by a monitoring station outside Carlsbad. A junior analyst flagged them as mechanical interference. But the intervals matched no known equipment or drilling. They were too deep, too clean. Then they started moving. The epicenter of each wave shifted gradually, forming a slow, precise arc beneath the ridge. Like something massive buried was rotating. Or waking. The lead technician, an old seismologist named Brent Navarro, compared the data to sonar scans from naval archives. He didn't tell anyone what he found. He simply shut his laptop and muttered 3 words. "It's a heartbeat." Meanwhile, Linda Bowers continued her nightly rituals. She no longer slept fully. She rested in bursts, surrounded by maps and notes, her windows covered with heavy curtains. The EMF reader remained by her side, though it hadn't worked since the night of the object. Still she watched. Each evening at 2:06 a.m., the air inside her house shifted. Not the temperature. The weight. Books settled. Glasses rattled slightly in the cupboard. The clock on her wall slowed, always for exactly 7 seconds. And in those seconds Linda heard the sound again. Not a hum. Not a tone. A voice. Whispering not in her ears but inside her spine. Too fast to understand. Too quiet to ignore. Not human. Never human. But deliberate. A few miles south, in the unmarked hills above Dog Canyon, hikers stumbled across something buried after a storm. At first glance, it looked like a large boulder cracked in half. But its interior wasn't stone. It was lined with hexagonal patterns, smooth, metallic, unnaturally precise. One of the hikers reached out to touch it. Before his fingers made contact, the object let out a pulse, a deep resonance that made their ears pop and filled their vision with static. They ran. They never returned. By the next week, the object was gone. In its place was a patch of scorched earth in the shape of an eye, wide, oval, almost reptilian. The vegetation around it began to die. Locals called it the Devil's Scar. Linda wasn't surprised. She had seen it weeks before in her dream journal. Page 32. A drawing she didn't remember sketching. The same shape. The same position. Labeled in shaky handwriting, the observer node. She didn't remember writing that either. At the same time, over 300 miles away, a private satellite belonging to a civilian imaging company picked up something impossible. While mapping thermal patterns across West Texas, the satellite captured a perfect heat signature rising beneath Guadalupe Ridge. A long, oblong shape, several hundred meters wide, stretching deep beneath the mountain. It glowed not from heat, but from absorption. As if it was drawing power from the land itself. The image was flagged internally. Minutes later, the server hosting the raw data crashed. When the engineers brought it back online, the file had been replaced with a blank white image titled null. One of the technicians kept a copy of the original frame. 3 days later he disappeared. His apartment was left untouched. Except for one thing. Carved into his desk, the same word as before. Marsh. Linda, seated alone in her kitchen, read the final line of her most recent dream journal. It had appeared without her memory of writing it. The handwriting wasn't hers. They are beneath us, not above. They have always been beneath us. Watching. Waiting. Listening through stone. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Outside, the wind stopped. The coyotes were silent. The sky, though cloudless, no longer showed stars. And somewhere in the earth below, the heartbeat pulsed once more. By mid-January, something changed beneath Guadalupe Ridge. It wasn't visible. It wasn't loud. But those who lived close, those who had already begun to feel the ridge instead of simply observing it, knew it had shifted. Like the moment between inhale and exhale, the ridge was now in a state of expectation. People began leaving the area. Families packed quietly in the night. Ranches that had stood for 3 generations were suddenly abandoned. Signs were left swinging in the wind. No for sale notices. No calls. Just silence where life used to be. And those who stayed behind? They spoke in whispers. They didn't ask questions. And none of them, under any circumstance, went near the old mine entrance northwest of the ridge. Because something had started echoing from inside. It was a retired miner named Wes Calhoun who first returned to the shaft. He wasn't chasing stories. He was chasing memory. That mine was where he spent most of his life. back when the rocks gave up their ore and the mountain was just stone, not a secret. He brought a portable recorder. He never intended to go far, just a short walk in, just to hear the silence. But the silence was gone. Halfway through the descent, his recorder captured a tone. Low. Pulsing. Artificial. Like a beacon buried miles below the surface. He reached a bend where the tunnel forked. What he saw there was never described. But the recording captured the moment he dropped the device. His breathing froze. One word escaped. And not alone. After that, only static. And then a second voice. Not his. Not human. Something that hissed, not through air, but through frequency. Wes was found 3 days later. Alive. Staggering through scrub brush 6 miles from the mine. Clothes torn. Shoes missing. He was dehydrated, delirious, and blind in one eye. He never spoke again. When asked what happened, he only cried. And in the hospital, during one of his night terrors, nurses reported he clawed at the wall and shouted. They woke up because we listened. Meanwhile, the ground near the ridge began to change. Plants wilted. Small animals vanished. The birds flew strange patterns, spirals, always above the same patch of rock, where the electromagnetic data had once spiked and gone silent. Surveyors sent a drone. It lasted 90 seconds before crashing. Its final image showed not a structure, not a cave, but a pattern burned into the soil. Geometric. Angular. Radiating from a center point like an artificial mandala carved from radiation. And at the center? A perfect circle. Charred. Cracked. Hollow. Linda Bowers saw the image through a leaked email forwarded anonymously. She didn't react. She had already drawn the exact same shape in her journal 3 nights before, waking up with her hands covered in ink. It was the shape she now saw in her dreams, behind the eyes of something ancient. Not sleeping. Not moving. Just knowing. That night, she heard something new. A vibration not just beneath her floor, but in her bones. Like every cell in her body was being measured, mapped, recorded. And in her mind, a phrase formed. Clear. Foreign. Yet unmistakable. The seal is thin. Far underground, beneath the western spine of the ridge, a network of seismic sensors began to fail. One by one, their signals stuttered. Not due to malfunction, but interference. A rising pressure from below. A presence moving through stone like a ship through deep water. Then, at 3:12 a.m., an anomaly struck the grid. All sensors in a 20-kilometer radius recorded a single harmonic pulse. Measured. Rhythmic. Repeating every 66 seconds. This wasn't a quake. It wasn't natural. It was a signal. A pattern broadcast from somewhere inside the Earth. And deep within the archives of a government facility hundreds of miles away, an automated alert triggered a file locked since 1971. The file's title was simple. Guadalupe-class contingency. Status, breach imminent. No alarms sounded. No jets scrambled. Only silence. Because those who knew the signal had been waiting for it. At exactly 3:13 a.m., 1 minute after the harmonic pulse beneath Guadalupe Ridge registered across seismic networks, a hidden subroutine activated in a secured military data vault under Peterson Space Force Base. No one manually triggered it. No technician typed a command. It was automatic, contingency code buried for decades beneath layers of encryption. The file was labeled Black Access Protocol Echo Drift. And it opened itself. Inside were coordinates, directives, and one chilling phrase. I initiate passive observation. Do not engage. Do not interfere. They are aware. Within 2 hours, an unmarked surveillance satellite adjusted its path to geosynchronous orbit above West Texas. Below it, a black van rolled through the desert. It carried 4 men. No insignia. No conversation. Only one spoke, the driver, reading aloud from a checklist written in blocky, outdated type. Protocol Alpha. 2 observers. 1 containment specialist. 1 terminal. They arrived at an old ranger station near the northern ridge, long since closed, its windows boarded, its walls sunbleached. But the concrete foundation concealed a narrow elevator shaft, unused since the Cold War. And at the bottom, beneath 40 feet of earth, a listening room awaited. Inside was a desk, a power node, and a chair bolted to the floor. They turned on a receiver. Back in Del City, Linda Bowers hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not because of fear, but because the dreams had become waking. She no longer had to close her eyes to see them. The visions came like flashes behind her gaze. Flickers of the thing buried beneath the ridge. Of what it saw. Of how it saw. It didn't perceive the world like humans did. Not in shapes or motion. It read frequencies, memories, intention. And somehow it was still learning her. She began to draw in bursts. Geometric forms. Spiral equations. Diagrams of structures she didn't understand. Notes in languages she had never studied. One line appeared over and over again. They do not arrive. They emerge. The team inside the listening room monitored the harmonic pulses. Each one identical in amplitude, frequency, and decay. But something changed on the 4th night. Instead of a single pulse, there were 2. Slightly staggered. Not an echo. A reply. And beneath the pattern, a signature, a dense, complex modulation encoded into the wave. When processed through the decrypted software, the result wasn't data. It was an image. Blurred. Distorted. But unmistakably artificial. It resembled a map. But not of geography. Not of terrain. It was neurological. A chart of a human brain. But altered. Rewired. And beneath it, a red mark hovered over the limbic system, the region governing emotion, memory, fear. The machine interpreted the message. Your memory is the gate. The observers didn't sleep after that. They rotated shifts, each watching the ridge through infrared optics, noting subtle movements in the soil. Occasionally, a shadow flickered across the ground, where no tree stood, where no birds flew. One night, the containment specialist stood alone outside the bunker and stared toward the mountain. He whispered one word before vanishing. Inside. He left behind only his boots, neatly placed by the door. No tracks. No struggle. Only a new indentation in the soil, identical to the others found weeks ago. Circular. Smooth. For meters wide. Meanwhile, seismic pulses increased in frequency. No longer once per hour. Now every 10 minutes. Then every 5. But what truly alarmed the satellite operators was this. The pulses were no longer originating from the ridge. They were now moving. Slowly. Measured. Direct. East. Toward population. Toward us. That night, Linda sat in her kitchen, staring at a small stone she had found near the original impact site. It vibrated softly in her hand, not from heat, not from mechanics. From memory. It was like a recorder. But instead of sound, it held an image. One she saw whenever she closed her eyes. An opening. In the ground. Deep and endless. And something beneath it unfurling. A thing not built. Not born. Something that waited for humanity to become loud enough. Curious enough. Blind enough to reach for it. The light over the ridge was never a ship. It was a signal flare. And the ridge itself? Not just a mountain. A lid. And now, it was coming off. 2 days after the dual pulse event, a classified memo reached the desk of a program director in Langley. The memo was unsigned, devoid of letterhead, and typed on a mechanical typewriter. It read, "The ridge is open. Movement confirmed. Full descent protocol authorized. No recovery." At 0400 hours, a convoy of 6 black transport trucks departed from a decommissioned military hangar in Arizona. Inside were unmarked crates, portable sensor arrays, and 5 men in sealed suits. Their destination, Guadalupe Ridge. They weren't coming to study. They were coming to contain. As the convoy approached, a dust storm formed not on radar but through electromagnetic scatter, like heat haze warped through static. Local weather stations failed to log its presence. But satellite data showed the temperature around the ridge had dropped by 15 degrees within minutes. By the time the trucks reached the old ranger station, 2 instruments in the lead vehicle had shorted out. One of the drivers began to convulse. The medic in the rear vehicle administered aid. The driver's final words before losing consciousness. "They're already above us, but not in the sky." Within the hour, the containment team opened the mouth of the ridge. It had once been a cave. A deep limestone cavity once used by early miners, later mapped and sealed. But now, without excavation, the entrance stood open, wide, black, breathing cold into the desert air. Inside was no longer a cave. It had changed. The walls were smooth, metallic, curved with impossible geometry. Their lights, though high-powered, struggled to reflect anything. The space swallowed light, just like the object Ruiz had seen through his telescope. The team advanced. Every 5 meters, their suits recorded a pulse, not sound, not radiation, but emotional pressure. Fear. Paranoia. Disorientation. It was environmental. Controlled. Engineered. They were being studied. 2 men turned back before reaching the first chamber. The others pressed on. Linda Bowers felt it the moment they entered. She was miles away, standing in her yard, watching the stars fade behind a thin veil of cloudless distortion. Her body locked in place. Time slowed. And from deep inside her chest, a pressure began to build. A sound like voices underwater flooded her mind. A phrase repeated, one she'd never heard in any language, but which she understood completely. The descent is not downward. It is inward. She fell to her knees. Her nose bled. And in her journal, inside her locked house, the pen moved. No hand touched it. It wrote. They opened the gate. Inside the ridge, the containment team reached a structure. Perfectly spherical. Black. Seamless. It was not resting on the cavern floor. It floated 3 feet above the ground. Spinning without motion. Generating no sound, no field, yet every scanner returned corrupted data. Thermal. Magnetic. Optical. All unreadable. The containment specialist approached with a probe. As the probe neared the sphere, his radio cut out. His camera feed froze. But the heart monitor spiked. He wasn't dead. He wasn't unconscious. He was dreaming in real time, wide awake. His vitals slowed. His skin temperature dropped. His pupils dilated. And on the screen, in the telemetry log, one line of data appeared that hadn't been transmitted by any equipment. It read, "Do not wake the deep." Above ground, the sky began to fracture. Not visibly. Not yet. But for those sensitive enough to feel it, animals, sensors, children, it was as if a membrane had torn between layers of air. Birds stopped flying. Dogs howled in unison. Radios across the desert hissed the same phrase in Morse code. Not transmitted. Not broadcast. Echoed. We are beneath your memory. By morning, the ridge was silent again. The convoy never left. No messages were sent. Only a static beacon repeating in endless sequence. Not SOS. Not a request for help. But a recording of breath. Slow. Measured. Mechanical. Like something massive, alive, and very old had begun to breathe again. And deep below the ridge, beneath layers of earth and centuries of silence, the black sphere began to open. The sphere opened without sound. No hinges. No seams. Just a slow, elegant separation, like light peeling from itself. Inside was not a mechanism, not a creature, not even a void. It was a mind. And it reached out. Not in movement, not through space, but through thought. It didn't speak. It didn't signal. It understood. Every man in that chamber fell still. Their heart rates flatlined, not in death, but in stasis. Suspended. Trapped between awareness and surrender. For 20 minutes no one moved. When the monitoring team above realized all telemetry had frozen, they triggered emergency protocols. No response. They sent a drone down the tunnel. It lasted 12 seconds before returning to the surface on its own. It had not flown. It had been returned. Gently. Inside the drone's memory core was a message. Not encoded. Not transmitted. Etched directly into the solid-state drive. This is not intrusion. It is inheritance. Linda Bowers had stopped sleeping. Not because of fear, but because sleep had become something else. Every time she closed her eyes, she was there, inside the ridge, standing in that chamber, staring into the sphere. But the sphere wasn't just an object now. It was a doorway. A reflection. A presence that reshaped itself based on what she brought with her. When she was afraid, it showed her fire. When she was curious, it showed her stars. And when she was silent, it showed her itself. In one of those dreams, she asked a question. Not with words, but with intent. What are you? The reply was a series of images. A planet with no atmosphere, scarred by deep hexagonal trenches. A tower built underground, stretching miles into liquid stone. A creature, no, a vessel, hovering above a newborn Earth, long before language. And finally, a single line burned across her vision. We came before your skies. We stayed beneath your bones. She woke screaming. Her nose bleeding. The mirror in her bathroom had cracked, not from impact, but from resonance. Every electronic device in her home had reset to the same timestamp. Midnight. At a monitoring facility in Nevada, the intelligence analyst tasked with reviewing intercepted Skywatch data made an emergency call. Dozens of classified weather satellites had registered a spike in cosmic microwave background radiation, localized entirely over Guadalupe Ridge. This was impossible. Background radiation did not fluctuate. It did not localize. Unless something older than the universe had just taken a breath. The analyst tried to flag the anomaly. The system responded. Flag acknowledged. Access locked. Transfer to Echelon 9. She was reassigned by morning. Her clearance revoked. Her silence bought. Meanwhile, Linda began hearing a sound, not through the air, but through memory. A tone that triggered déjà vu so powerful, she once collapsed to her knees, vomiting from disorientation. She remembered moments that had never happened. Lives that weren't hers. Futures that hadn't arrived yet. And in all of them, the ridge remained. Not as a place. As a threshold. The government, or what remained of its knowledge cells, enacted silent level 0. Airspace over the region was reclassified. Satellite paths were altered. Ranger access was restricted. Maps were redrawn. Publicly, nothing changed. But in the rooms where reality was monitored, the message was clear. Do not touch the sphere. Do not respond. It is listening. But it was already too late. Because by then, the mind below had started to remember us. At 2:06 a.m., the time when all disturbances at Guadalupe Ridge had always begun, something shifted. Not beneath the earth this time, but above it. Every radio tower within 300 kilometers of the ridge registered a massive, coordinated spike in bandwidth, a silent burst that carried no traditional signal, no carrier wave. Yet hundreds of receivers across the region picked it up simultaneously. The content? Unintelligible. Until it began to translate itself. At first, it sounded like scrambled audio, white noise with structure buried beneath. But over the next 6 hours, the data began aligning on its own. It formed audio, then patterns, then language. Only one full sentence decoded. We accept your memory. No one knew who it was for. At the same time, in her home, Linda Bowers stood at the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Except it wasn't the wall anymore. It had become a window. Through it, she saw not her yard, not the desert, but a massive chamber, hundreds of meters across. Circular. Lined with columns made not of stone, but light suspended in form. She was no longer dreaming. Something had bridged her into the place beneath the ridge. And it wasn't a hallucination. Her pulse was steady. Her body upright. Yet her mind floated freely across that impossible space. Then she saw them. Figures, not solid, not visible in a traditional sense, but silhouettes of presence. They moved with weight, with thought, but no mass. They didn't look like us. But they knew what we were. One turned toward her not with a face, but with focus. And into her mind, a word entered with such clarity it fractured her breath. Hello. Back inside the sealed chamber of Guadalupe Ridge, the sphere continued to spin, though it never moved. Above it, the ceiling had begun to change. A spiral of symbols formed in patterns that no one could read but triggered a strange recognition. Geometric memory. Like seeing a shape you dreamt as a child. The observation team, reduced to 2 by now, recorded a phenomenon that hadn't been seen before. Not a pulse. A response. The sphere was no longer the only transmitter. Somewhere deeper below, miles beyond any drilling depth, a second beacon activated. Not artificial. Not man-made. Organic. It emitted a frequency that canceled all electromagnetic noise in the area. For exactly 11 minutes, no device worked. No signal passed. Time itself seemed to pause. And then came a sound. A tone made not of vibration, but of meaning. All who heard it described it differently. A song. A prayer. A warning. A name. But all agreed on one thing. It wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to be remembered. Across the country, strange behaviors erupted in people sensitive to electrical frequencies. Sleepwalkers began standing in open fields, pointing west. Migraine spiked. Children drew spirals on walls without knowing why. And in a secure psychological study at a VA hospital in New Mexico, 10 patients simultaneously spoke in a language that had no translation. They repeated the same phrase for hours. The lock was memory. The key is noise. The gate is awake. Linda collapsed that night. She was taken to a small clinic outside El Paso, unresponsive but stable. When she awoke, she remembered nothing of the hospital, but everything of what she saw inside the chamber. She told the nurse one thing. They didn't come from above. We called them from within. When she was alone, she sketched the chamber. The spiral. The lights. The presence. In the center, she drew the sphere. And around it, smaller orbs, satellites. Seeds. One of them marked in red. Not under Guadalupe Ridge. But under a city. A major one. The ridge wasn't unique. It was a node in a network. And one by one they were waking up. It began without warning. On February 3rd, at precisely 9:14 a.m., a nationwide GPS blackout struck the southwestern United States. Pilots reported instruments spinning, compasses turning erratically. Delivery drones fell from the sky. Civilian aircraft were rerouted. Satellites overhead passed through an invisible fog, one they couldn't scan, couldn't see, but all registered as missing time. The epicenter? Guadalupe Ridge. But this time, the effect didn't stop there. It expanded. A circular disturbance, 50 miles in diameter, formed above the region. Invisible to the naked eye, but perfectly visible to radar. A dome of signal distortion. No aircraft could penetrate it. No signal escaped. Not even weather formed within it. It became known unofficially as the activation field. Inside the dome, those still within the radius felt it immediately. Not physically. Not even mentally at first. Emotionally. People described overwhelming senses of déjà vu, childhood memories surfacing without context, irrational bursts of joy, grief, or fear. Some wept uncontrollably. Others stood still for hours, staring west toward the ridge. And then the dreams began. Everyone dreamed the same dream. They stood in a circular room. Stone walls that breathed. A hum that throbbed like a living pulse. In the center, a spiral staircase, descending into darkness that never ended. They never reached the bottom. They always woke up before the final step. In Washington, a silent committee was convened. They didn't meet in a building. They met underground, in a chamber that didn't officially exist. The topic was brief. Not what to do, but whether anything could be done. Because the ridge wasn't causing the effect, it was only the first to respond. New data revealed identical frequencies beginning to pulse beneath other regions scattered across the globe. In Egypt, in Siberia, in Antarctica, all places where ancient geography had collapsed into myth. And the pulses were synchronizing. Meanwhile, Linda Bowers was no longer alone. She hadn't left the clinic, but others like her, sensitives, experiencers, those who had seen or felt them, were being brought to her one by one. Not by force. They simply came, as if drawn by instinct. Among them was a child from Marfa who could draw perfect symbols in wet sand, symbols no human language had ever contained. A woman from Alamogordo who painted landscapes of other planets in her sleep. An old veteran who said he saw the same black sphere in 1952 beneath the ruins of a temple in Southeast Asia, but was told to forget. They gathered, quiet, connected by something invisible. Linda understood now. The mind beneath the ridge wasn't a visitor. It was a conductor. The events weren't escalation. They were alignment. Back inside Guadalupe Ridge, the containment team, or what was left of them, remained frozen in stasis. The black sphere no longer pulsed. It had unfolded itself into a pattern that extended along the chamber walls, embedding itself into the very rock like circuitry spreading from a central processor. The structure no longer looked alien. It looked engineered. Wired into the mountain. Into the planet. And at the center of it all was something new. A second sphere, smaller, hovering inside the first. Not black, but pulsing white. It spun not in place, but in time. Each rotation resetting the instruments inside the bunker. Resetting the clocks. Resetting the idea of a now. And each time it turned, the memory of those who watched it changed. Names were forgotten. Dates shifted. Personal histories rewrote themselves in subtle cracks. Time wasn't linear anymore. It was folding. And beneath the folds was something waiting to step through. Across the world, those sensitive to the activation field began waking with identical phrases on their lips. Whispered in their sleep. Written in notes they didn't remember writing. Etched into glass by fingers they didn't recall moving. We were here before thought. We gave you the pattern. Now you must return it. And in a small secure lab in Langley, an AI tasked with scanning global cognitive patterns, dream logs, search data, subconscious phrase correlations, halted its loop. It produced a single sentence. The operator leaned in. Pattern complete. Initiating awakening. The screen blinked off. Then flashed one last word before shutting down. Marsh. At exactly midnight on February 7th, the activation field reached its apex. 75 miles in radius. Then 100. Then it stopped expanding, not because it was complete, but because it had connected. Sensors confirmed it, a frequency spike in Siberia. Another beneath the sands west of Luxor. A third from under the ice shelf in Queen Maud Land. And then something impossible happened. For 7 full seconds, the entire electromagnetic spectrum on Earth went silent. No radio. No Wi-Fi. No satellite ping. No data transfer. Not even light from distant stars. The universe itself paused. And then it began again, but different. Not chaotic. Harmonized. As if the world had synced to an outside tempo. Not ours. Within Guadalupe Ridge, the chamber was no longer a geological cavity. It had evolved, or perhaps revealed, its true form. The spiral structure now stretched downward, rotating slowly, like a tunnel made of light and memory. Symbols scrolled along the walls. Unreadable. Alive. The white sphere pulsed steadily, nested in the chamber's heart like a seed about to split open. The last containment specialist, Agent Doyle, remained inside. He no longer recorded data. His suit had fused to his skin. Not melted. Merged. The transmission logs showed one final voice recording from Doyle before total silence. He spoke slowly, reverently, as if dictating a prophecy. It's not technology. It's intention. The ridge wasn't placed here. It was grown. It's remembering what it was before we arrived. Before Earth was Earth. They're not invading. They're returning. Back at the clinic, Linda Bowers awoke from her longest blackout yet. She sat upright, eyes wide, breathing calm. All around her, the others, dozens now, were waking in unison. Some weeping, some smiling. One boy humming a tune that hadn't existed for thousands of years. Linda stood. She walked outside, barefoot, into the night. And in the sky above Guadalupe Ridge, there was no sky. The stars had pulled back, forming a circle of clear black, perfect, infinite. A lens, not a hole. A window. Through it, something vast moved. Not a ship. Not a creature. A structure of awareness. It cast no shadow, but gravity bent slightly beneath it. The desert air folded upward, sand rising like dust in reverse. A low harmonic growled across the horizon. No one ran. No one screamed. The field had shifted something inside them. They weren't being invaded. They were being realigned. From old military bunkers to data vaults, alarms went off, but no commands were given. The event had surpassed protocol. Above-ground satellites attempted to block the optical anomalies. They failed. Photographs of the sky around Guadalupe were captured by civilians. All showed the same thing. A spiral of light, glowing faintly with geometries impossible to fake, edges that didn't curve, but bent time itself. Those who stared too long began to recall things they'd never lived. Wars never fought. Skies never flown. Cities never built, but once dreamed. It wasn't hypnosis. It was restoration. Inside the chamber, the white sphere finally unfolded. From within, a shape rose, not mechanical, not alien, but familiar in a way that made the human mind ache. A figure made of memory, built from thought, cast in the likeness of us, but older, truer, before language and flesh. It stepped forward once. The sensors above the ridge melted instantly. Power grids failed. All sound in the region dropped to zero. Then, in the dark, a voice, not loud, not foreign, spoke in every mind tuned to the field. We gave you the beginning. You wrote your own middle. Now, return your stories. We are the threshold. Step through. And in homes, in deserts, in hidden bases, and abandoned cities, people began to dream of gates opening beneath them. And in every dream, across every culture, they heard the same final call. One more step, and the veil becomes the mirror. At 3 a.m. on February 8th, the veil lifted. Not torn. Not shattered. Withdrawn. Across the world, the activation field vanished in an instant, but what remained was not silence. It was clarity. For those attuned, the sensation was overwhelming. Like stepping outside a sealed chamber and realizing the sky was larger than ever imagined. The air tasted different. Shadows no longer felt empty. And for the first time, the world felt observed, not from without, but from within. Inside Guadalupe Ridge, the chamber had transformed. No longer a space. A transition. The spiral staircase Linda and so many others had dreamed of now stood fully revealed in stone and light, descending into a space deeper than the earth itself, a realm that folded inward instead of downward. Linda stood at its edge. She wasn't alone. Around her, the others had gathered. Dozens. Then hundreds. Drawn from across the world. Not summoned, not compelled, called. Each carried a piece of the pattern. Memories. Frequencies. Lives lived at the edge of perception. As they approached the steps, they heard the final voice of the threshold. This is not escape. This is return. You were never separate. You were always the answer we left behind. They descended. One by one. Not into death, but into remembrance. Above the ridge, the sky turned clear, crystal clear, with no artificial haze, no radio scatter. The stars aligned in configurations long lost to modern astronomers. constellations older than history. And for those who remained behind, the earth felt different. Time no longer linear. Gravity no longer constant. Electronics functioned, but with a strange hum. Compasses spun, then corrected. And in the background of every device with audio output, a tone could be heard faintly when all else was silent. Not static. A heartbeat. Governments denied everything. Satellites malfunctioned. The activation field was labeled a solar anomaly. But those who had touched the field no longer cared. They no longer needed proof. Because they knew the truth. The mine beneath the ridge had not been an entity. It had been a repository. A memory storage for a civilization older than ours, one that had seeded worlds with patterns and watched from the quiet places beneath crust and ocean and time. And now that humanity had become loud enough, complex enough, and fractured enough, it had finally been heard. And those chosen had not been abducted. They had been retrieved. Days passed. Weeks. The ridge remained. But the chamber had sealed itself. Not hidden. Not buried. Just closed. The spiral was gone. The hum quiet. But for a handful who still listened at night, one final whisper would echo through dream and static, carried on winds that knew too much. We did not come to conquer. We came to remember through you. And for those who walked through the mirror, no grave was needed. No name was lost. Because they had not disappeared. They had returned to the story that began before language. The story beneath all others. The one still being written just below our feet.